Welcome, dear listener, to a world where the gentle breeze carries stories whispered softly through the trees, and where the quiet magic of the earth unfolds in every step. Tonight, we journey together with a young soul named Elara, who follows a path guided not by maps or signs, but by letters delivered by the wind itself, each one a tender message. A quiet invitation to discover the hidden wonders of a dreamlike world. As you settle in, let your breath grow slow and even. Let the calm of this place wrap around you like a soft blanket. There is no hurry here, only the gentle unfolding of moments, one after another, like petals drifting on the breeze. So, close your eyes if you wish, and join Elara as she walks beneath moonlit skies, through fields of silver grass, and beside whispering brooks. Together, we will find the quiet beauty in connection, kindness, and the light that lives within each of us. Let the story begin. The first thing Elara noticed that morning was the way the curtains breathed. They were made of the thinnest linen, almost transparent in the early light, their fibers holding together so delicately it seemed they might drift apart if the breeze wished it. The fabric swelled and sank in a rhythm that felt alive, as if the house itself were slowly inhaling and exhaling. With every small movement came a faint sigh, a hush like a distant voice speaking words she could not quite hear. She stayed very still under the soft quilt, her head resting on the cool side of the pillow, watching sunlight arrive in long, slow strokes across the far wall. This was not the hurried light of summer noons, nor the sharp gleam of winter dawns. It was the unhurried glow of a morning that had taken its time wandering through the garden, pausing among the roses, slipping quietly past the honeysuckle, and only now deciding to step inside. Outside, the world seemed wrapped in something softer than silence. It was not empty. She could still hear the faint hum of bees far across the meadow, the slow creak of the old fence when the wind leaned against it, the whisper of leaves when a bird shifted in the branches, but each sound seemed cushioned, as though the air was cradling it gently before letting it reach her ears. Elara rose slowly, her bare feet meeting the cool wooden floor, and moved with the quiet care of someone who did not wish to disturb a sleeping friend. The scent of the garden met her at the doorway, the sweetness of honeysuckle mingled with the freshness of dew. A perfume so familiar she could have closed her eyes and found her way through it. The little balcony outside her room overlooked the meadow. That morning, it was a sea of silver blue. The grasses bowed beneath thousands of dewdrops that winked like far-off stars. Mist curled in the distance, folding the horizon into the sky so gently that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. She had grown up in the small wooden house at the meadow's edge, and though she had walked its winding paths often, there were corners of it she had never touched, places that seemed to belong only to the wind. The meadow had its own moods, sometimes laughing with the sound of grasshoppers and crickets, sometimes still and listening, as though waiting for something only it could hear. This morning, it seemed curious. The breeze moved in soft, deliberate swells, pushing gently at her hair, slipping over her shoulders, lingering at the edges of her sleeves. It was then she noticed something unusual. Resting on the windowsill inside, one she had passed only moments before, was an envelope. It was cream-colored, faintly crinkled, as though it had traveled a great distance. A thin blue thread wound twice around it, tied in a simple knot that looked as if it would fall open with a single pull. Across the front, written in a looping hand that seemed both careful and playful, was her name, Elara. There was no address, no stamp, no sign of where it had come from. She stood looking at it for a long moment, the cool air moving past her like a question. No neighbor she knew would leave something tied with such a thread. And the handwriting. There was something about it that felt like motion itself, as though it had been written by someone who understood the shapes of breezes and the way petals fall. She loosened the knot. Inside was a single slip of paper, so thin and light she felt she might lose it if she let go. The words upon it shimmered faintly in the light, neither gold nor silver, but some shifting shade between, like the gleam of a shell in shallow water. Follow the path the wind shows you. There is something waiting to be found. There was no signature. She read it twice. The first time, it felt like a suggestion. The second time, It felt like a promise. Without quite deciding, she slipped the letter into her pocket, stepped into her shoes, and went outside. At the meadow's edge, she paused, unsure of where to begin. The breeze circled her ankles, stirred the grasses, and then, very softly, pushed in one direction. She watched as a narrow trail appeared in the shifting stems. Not a straight line, but a winding ribbon that curved and bent as though it preferred to wander rather than arrive. She followed. The air was warm, but only just, the kind of warmth that feels like the memory of sunlight rather than the sun itself. Above her, the sky was washed in the kind of blue that made the white edges of clouds glow like soft brushstrokes. Every step was accompanied by the soft give of moss underfoot, or the gentle crunch of dry leaves. Here and there, the wind carried new scents to her, lavender from somewhere unseen, the faint tartness of green apples, the cool spice of wild mint. It was as though the air itself were telling her small stories, each one lasting no more than a breath. After a time, she could not have said how long, she came to a grove of trees whose leaves glistened like green glass. Light filtered down through the canopy in shifting coins, dappling the moss and the small stream that wound between the roots. In the shallows, stones lay in spirals and circles, as though the water had been playing some patient game. Elara knelt, letting her fingers trail through the cool current. The sensation seemed to travel up her arm and settle in her chest, filling her with a calm so complete she could have stayed there for hours. But the wind stirred again, threading through the branches with a sound like distant chimes. She rose and moved on. The path wound gently through the grove until the trees thinned and gave way to a wide clearing. The grass here was so fine and soft it looked as though it had been brushed smooth by careful hands. In the center stood a single tree, its trunk pale and twisted, its branches filled with blossoms the color of moonlight. Each petal quivered faintly, as if it were deciding whether to drift to the ground or remain a moment longer. Beneath the tree sat a small table, and upon the table rested another envelope. This one was tied with a thread the color of spring leaves. Elara approached slowly, as though stepping into a dream. She untied the thread and opened the letter. The world is wider than you imagine, and it waits for you to walk it slowly. The words settled in her like a warm cup of tea. She stayed beneath the tree for a while, feeling the petals land softly at her feet. When she rose, the wind was ready again. It moved past her, scattering a few blossoms into the air, and she followed their drifting path. The trail led her along a hillside where the grass shimmered silver in the light. Wildflowers swayed as she passed, their colors softened by the distance, as if painted with a careful, watery brush. The air here was different, cooler, carrying the smell of distant rain. At the hill's crest, she saw another surprise, a wooden footbridge stretching over a narrow stream. Beneath it, the water moved slowly, carrying with it small clusters of yellow leaves. At the far side of the bridge, resting against the rail, was another envelope, this one tied with a pale lavender thread. Kindness is a seed that grows even when you forget where you planted it. She traced the words with her fingertip. The handwriting was the same as before, looping, gentle, as though written with the patience of someone who knew there was no rush. The wind waited while she read. Then, almost shyly, it brushed her shoulder and moved on. Her path took her through places she felt certain she had never seen, even though they couldn't have been far from home. A meadow where the grass was so tall it whispered in her ears. A glade where tiny blue flowers grew in the pattern of constellations. A pond that mirrored the sky so perfectly she wasn't sure where the clouds truly were. In each place, the wind left her a letter. Some were tucked beneath stones shaped like hearts. Others caught gently in the crook of a branch. One was even pinned beneath the petal of an enormous white lily, as if the flower had been keeping it safe. The messages were never long. Listen to the quiet, it knows what you need. Every step is a conversation with the earth. You carry more light than you realize. With every letter, she felt something inside her loosen, a soft entangling she hadn't known she needed. The world was still the same, yet different. Colors seemed more alive. Scents lingered longer. The rhythm of her own breathing felt more in tune with the air. By the time the sky began to soften into the pink gold of late afternoon, Elara reached the edge of a wide, still lake. The surface was so calm it held the sky in perfect reflection. She could not tell whether she was looking at water or the heavens themselves. On the shore sat a small wooden box carved with patterns of waves and spirals. She knelt and opened it. Inside was the final letter, tied with a thread the color of sunlight. You have already found what you were looking for. It is the quiet joy of walking. The way the world opens when you follow its call. And the way the wind always knows where you belong. She read the words slowly, then closed her eyes. The air at the lakeshore was cool and steady, and she felt as if the wind had wrapped itself gently around her like a shawl. Elara stayed by the lake for a long while, watching the light change. The surface shifted from silver to rose gold, and the mirrored clouds began to drift lazily apart. Somewhere out on the water, a single ripple spread, though she could see no stone thrown, no fish breaking the surface. It was as if the lake had sighed in its sleep. The wind had grown quieter here, moving only in the gentlest of breaths. She thought perhaps the journey had ended, that this would be the final place. But when she stood and turned toward home, the air nudged her softly, not behind her, but along the shoreline. She walked. The shore curved gently, bordered by willows whose long green ribbons trailed into the water. Their leaves shimmered faintly in the fading light, catching the last of the day's gold. Beneath one such willow, she found another envelope, this one tied with a silver-gray thread, like the color of dawn mist. The heart will always find a path, even where no road exists. The words felt like a promise she could not yet see the shape of. She tucked the letter away and continued. Soon the shoreline gave way to a field of soft, low moss. It felt springy underfoot, and her steps made no sound. In the middle of the mossy expanse stood a ring of small, pale stones. Inside the circle, the wind swirled gently, lifting and letting fall a handful of white feathers. As she entered, one feather drifted toward her, settling at her feet. Beneath it was another envelope, bound with a thread the pale gold of ripened wheat. Rest is not the same as stopping. Even stillness can be part of the journey. She lingered in that circle, breathing slowly, letting the words sink in. The wind seemed to approve. It curled around her ankles and moved on at a patient pace. From there, the path led through a patch of forest so hushed it felt like a cathedral made of green light. Ferns leaned toward her, their fronds trembling ever so slightly as she passed. High above, the canopy filtered the sky into shifting emeralds, each movement a soft wave of shadow and glow. In the hollow of an ancient oak, she found the next letter. The thread was deep violet, the color of evening just before the first stars appear. You are made of the same patience as the trees, the same quiet strength. Her fingers lingered on the paper, tracing each curve of the letters. And still, the wind led her on. It brought her to a meadow she had never seen before, though it could not have been far from home. Here, the flowers seemed to bloom in slow motion, petals turning gently as if to follow something she could not see. Bees moved lazily from one blossom to the next, their hum blending with the sigh of the grass. In the center stood a low wooden bench, and on it, of course, another letter. The thread this time was a soft coral pink, like the inside of a seashell. There is more sweetness in the world than you have yet tasted. The wind played with the ends of her hair, as if nodding in agreement. The meadow gave way to a narrow path lined with stones smoothed by years of wind and rain. Elara followed it as the light began to shift into the gentler tones of early evening. The air had cooled, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of late-blooming jasmine. Soon, the path dipped into a small valley where the grass was short and silvery in the fading light. A brook ran through its center, so clear she could see the pale shells of snails resting on the bottom. The water murmured softly over small pebbles, as if telling a story in a language just beyond her reach. On a flat stone beside the brook lay the next envelope. The thread was sea green, the color of water at the edge of a hidden cove. What you seek may change as you walk, and that is its own kind of finding. She smiled at the words, sensing their truth without needing to unravel it entirely. The wind's path curved away from the brook and led her up a slope sprinkled with small, star-shaped flowers. They glowed faintly, though the sun had not yet set. She knelt to touch one, and found that its petals were cool, almost like porcelain. As she rose, she saw another letter resting on the grass ahead. This one was tied with a deep amber thread, warm against her fingertips. Every day holds a small treasure. Let them find you. She tucked the letter away, feeling as though the treasure of this day had already been found many times over. The slope leveled into a high plateau, and from there, she could see the land spread out in every direction: meadows, woods, winding streams, and, far off, the shimmer of the lake she had left behind. The wind moved around her here in a slow circle, like an embrace. In the center of the plateau stood a single lantern, its glass glowing with a light that did not seem to come from flame. Beneath it rested an envelope tied with a thread of pale pearl. Even when you think you are alone, you are walking in the company of the sky. The words settled into her like the softest of blankets. She breathed in the quiet, letting the weight of the day ease from her shoulders. The wind shifted again, drawing her toward a narrow trail that seemed to slip between two tall hedges. The air there was warm, scented with herbs she could not quite name. The path wound gently and then opened into a hidden garden. There was no wall, no fence, only the sense that this place had been waiting. Beds of marigolds, lavender, and soft white blossoms spread in neat curves. In the center, a small fountain whispered into a shallow pool. Floating on the water's surface was the next envelope, its thread a pale rose gold. The world has a language beyond words. You have been speaking it all along. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the trickle of the fountain and the movement of the wind merge into one sound. Elara left the hidden garden by a narrow archway of flowering vines. The petals brushed her shoulders as she passed, releasing a faint, sweet fragrance that clung to the air behind her. The wind met her there, moving with a kind of quiet excitement, as though it had something special yet to show her. The path wound gently into an orchard. The trees were small and delicate, their branches heavy with pale fruit that glowed faintly in the dimming light. Some of the fruit had fallen and rested on the soft grass, unbruised, as if the ground itself had caught them carefully. At the base of the largest tree was another envelope, tied with a thread the color of soft dusk. You are part of every place your heart has touched. She read the words twice before slipping them into her pocket. The air in the orchard felt warm, holding on to the last of the day. The wind led her onward into an open field where tall grasses swayed in slow unison. Fireflies had begun to appear, one by one, their lights blinking like tiny lanterns in the growing dusk. They seemed to gather ahead of her, forming a glowing path through the field. In the center of this soft light, she found an envelope resting against a smooth piece of driftwood. Though there was no sign of any sea nearby, the thread was a gentle shade of sky blue. Light will always find a way to travel home. The message warmed her more than she expected. She stood for a long time watching the fireflies rise and drift, their lights joining the first stars overhead. The wind did not rush her. It waited until she began walking again, then moved ahead, slipping between the fireflies like a quiet guide. Beyond the field, the land sloped down toward a meadow filled with wild thyme. The air here was rich with its herbal scent, calming and steadying. At the meadow's far edge, beneath a leaning willow, another letter awaited her. The thread this time was green gold, like the color of sunlit moss. You belong to the gentle things as much as they belong to you. She touched the thread for a moment before untying it, feeling as if the words themselves were already with her. The wind's path grew softer now, its movements less like a guide and more like a companion walking beside her. They followed the curve of a stream, listening to its quiet song, until the sky deepened into a blue so rich it seemed almost to hum. On a small rise beside the stream sat a final letter for the night. The thread was pure white. Some journeys do not end. They become part of who you are. Elara held the letter in both hands, feeling the truth of it settle within her. Night unfolded slowly, like a great velvet cloth being laid across the sky. The stars appeared one by one, patient and unhurried, their light faint at first, then clear and steady. Elara walked in that soft glow, the wind moving beside her in a quiet rhythm that seemed to match her own steps. The land ahead dipped into a wide hollow, where the grasses were short and silvered by starlight. In the center of the hollow was a pool, its surface as still as polished glass. She knelt at its edge and saw not only her reflection, but also the stars above her doubled in the water's dark mirror. Floating there, perfectly balanced, was another envelope. She reached out carefully and lifted it from the surface. The thread binding it was the pale blue of moonlight on water. The world carries your reflection in more ways than you know. She tucked the letter safely away, feeling a soft warmth in her chest. The wind guided her to the far side of the hollow, where a narrow path climbed through low hills. Wild lavender grew thick here, brushing against her legs as she passed, releasing a fragrance that followed her like a blessing. Somewhere far off, an owl called, its voice low and steady. At the crest of the hill, another envelope rested on a stone. This one was tied with a warm brown thread, like the color of earth after rain. Every step you take is noticed by the quiet things. She stood there for a while, gazing out at the landscape bathed in night, the distant fields, the ribbon of the stream, the dark line of the orchard. They all felt close now, as though they had been walking with her. The wind moved gently ahead, not pulling, only inviting. She followed it down the slope to a grove where the trees were hung with soft white blossoms that glowed faintly in the dark. Each petal that fell seemed to linger in the air before settling, as if savoring the moment. On a low wooden bench beneath the largest tree, she found another letter, bound with a thread the color of pale gold. The gentlest moments often leave the deepest marks. She smiled at the truth of it, remembering the sound of the brook, the scent of thyme, the sight of fireflies lifting into the dusk. The wind moved around her then, in slow circles, like a farewell that was not quite a goodbye. The grove opened onto a quiet meadow where the grass lay soft and unbroken, as though it had been resting here for 100 years. Above, the stars shone with an easy brightness, and the moon hung low, casting a path of pale silver across the ground. The wind slowed until it was little more than a whisper. Elara followed its delicate trace toward the center of the meadow, where a single stone table stood. On it rested the final envelope. Its thread was unlike the others, woven from many colors: sky blue, moss green, rose gold, pearl white, and the deep amber of a late summer sunset. She recognized each hue. They were the colors of every letter she had gathered along the way. With careful fingers, she untied the thread. The paper inside was smooth and faintly warm to the touch. The journey you walk is woven into you. You have been gathering more than words. You have been gathering the quiet shape of who you are. Elara read the lines twice, then once more, letting them sink deep inside. She looked around at the meadow, the trees at its edges, the sky above, and felt, for the first time, that she belonged here completely. The wind curled gently around her one last time. It was not urging her forward now, nor pulling her back. It was simply there, steady and present, like an old friend. She understood then that it had always been this way, even before she noticed it. She slipped the last letter into her pocket with the others. The weight of them was light, but their presence felt steady, as if they were keeping time with her heartbeat. Turning slowly, she began walking toward the far side of the meadow. The grass swayed lightly under her steps, and the sound blended with the wind until it became a single, endless hush. The night air was cool and kind. Above her, the moon drifted westward. Somewhere in the distance, a brook murmured, an owl called, and the soft scent of lavender floated through the dark. Elara walked on, knowing the path would continue to appear beneath her feet. She no longer wondered when the journey might end, because it already lived within her, and she within it. And as she walked, The wind stayed beside her, carrying with it the promise of more gentle discoveries, more quiet treasures, and more moments that would settle, like letters, into the heart. The meadow grew softer, the stars blurred a little in her vision, and she felt the deep, restful peace of being exactly where she was meant to be. Thank you, dear listener, for walking this gentle path with Elara and the wind. May the quiet messages carried by the breeze settle softly in your heart, reminding you that even the smallest moments hold their own kind of magic. As you rest now, may your dreams be filled with light and kindness, and may you wake knowing that the journey of discovery lives always within you, soft, steady, and full of hope. Good night, and may the gentle wind carry you into peaceful, restful sleep.